Hello everybody, welcome to today's video where today we're going to be redoing the RPG tutorial. I decided to do this just because it has been requested by a viewer and the views for the space shooter were going down and it wasn't as popular as the RPG tutorial, so I wanted to focus on this one, and I wasn't really happy with the game and I wasn't really happy with continuing with the code and the tutorial, so I wanted to redo it. So that's what we're going to be working on for today. I have created my own thing right here, but we're going to see if it even works. As you can see, the character is going to probably be changed. I don't want to use the exact same character as beforehand, but as you can see, it's basically an infinite world with a bunch of tiles, and it just looks way more clean than the previous game. So without further ado, let's get started. First things first, we're going to do a one green flag clicked. Then we're going to grab two blocks. We're going to make two blocks. One of them is going to be called reset, run without screen refresh. This is going to just reset all of our variables, and make sure you pop that inside of the one green flag clicked. Then we're going to make another one, and we're going to call this create tile grid map, or whatever you want that has to do with creating the tile grid. We're going to put this under the reset hat block, and then put the create tile grid map right below that reset right there. So now we're going to make two variables which are just going to determine the size of the grid. We're going to do clone count x, basically the same thing as script patches for all sprites, and then clone count y for all sprites once again. So now that we've done this, we are going to put both of our blocks inside of the reset. We're going to have one as clone count x and one as clone count y. The x we're going to put 16 inside, and the y will be 13. This is just because of how large the screen is. Now, another thing is that for this size to work, we need to have the tile size at 200. And all tiles have to be a 16 by 16, which is rather easy if you just do convert it to vector and use 4 by 4 of these like grids. That is in Scratch. So now that we've done this, we're going to create our tile grid map. So I'm going to use 2 repeat loops. The outer repeat loop is going to be using the clone count x, and the inner repeat loop will use clone count y. Now we want to make sure that the actual sprite is not showing, because this is very clone based. So we're going to use a show and then a hide, just like that. Next thing we're going to do is we are just going to say go to, we're going to use we want it to go to x, set x to, we're going to use a multiplication, so multiply, and we're going to use the clone count x times negative 16, which is basically just the size of the tile. Then we are going to say change the y by 32 in the repeat loop, and change the x by 32 in the repeat loop. Then at the top of our clone count x repeat loop, we are going to set the y. We're going to copy and paste the set x and change this clone count x to a clone count y. Basically, these two blocks, the set x and the set y, position it so that everything is in the center. The grid is going to be created in the center, and then this is just creating the grid. So then we can just add a nice, when I create a clone of myself. And as you can see, it created the entire grid. So that works amazing, but the only issue with this is that it can't scroll or anything like that, and there's nothing really complicated about this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure we can actually set variables and all of that stuff and convert basically everything into a variable. So we're going to go tile x for the sprite only, and tile y for the sprite only. That's all you're going to need. So now here, since it says set x to this, we're going to use a set and not a change. We're going to use a set tile x, because this is an x, to this, and then we remove this x block. Then we're going to duplicate. We can remove this, set this to a tile y, and place in this function, and remove that. Now since these ones are change y's, we want it to be a change block, and we're going to use change tile Y by 32, remove, change tile X by 32, remove, just like that. So now the thing is not really going to work that well, as you can see. This is simply because we cannot position the tiles. It's just tile X and all of that stuff. It's not actually positioning the tiles. So I'm going to create a broadcast message right here. We're going to say forever loop broadcast message, and this new message is going to be called position tiles, very much inspired from GriffPatch's name for this function. And then we're just going to do a when I receive position tiles, and then we want it to go to X tile X and Y tile Y. And as you can see, it works perfectly fine now. So now we want to make sure that it can actually scroll and do all of that fancy stuff. So let's start working on that. First off, I'm just going to show off some of the specific tiles that we got here. We can remove border actually. So we have big. This tile specifically I've made very large. This is simply because I decided that it should be large so that I can scroll off screen more easily. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say switch costume to big, and then we're going to make a variable tile costume for this sprite only. And right here we're going to set the tile costume to pick random, and then 3 all the way to 16. Let's pick random 3 to 16. And then it's just going to pick everything randomly. Aha. So the problem is that we need to make sure that it's switched to big, and then switched to the tile costume. And now as you can see, it is much more varied. So now that we have done that, it's going to switch up all the costumes more, but we're going to work on that code a little bit more in a second here. First off, we're going to grab an if-then statement, and inside an if-then-else statement. Now this code was rather complicated from GriffPatch in terms of math. I'm not very good at math, but I was able to figure out how it all works. So here's the code right here. This is basically all of the stuff that we're about to make. So you can just pause and copy it here, but I'm just going to walk you through all the steps into making it. So first off, we are going to make sure that we have a above block. So in the blank section of this above block, we are going to do the absolute value of the tile X. And with GriffPatch's thing, he would have used a tile X minus camera X. As you can see right here, I'm not using camera X's and all of that stuff, and scroll X's and all of that in order to scroll things. It's just like normal, like the if-then statements and all of that stuff. It's just that. So next, we're just going to grab this right here, duplicate it. We're going to put it right inside of the 50 in this above block, and make sure that this is a positive, because the absolute value basically converts whatever this is to a positive. So if it's positive, then it remains positive. If it's a negative, then it converts to a positive. Now this code right here that was going to go here, which is tile X is below camera X. This is just determining whether the tile X is a negative or positive value. And right now this is just the code to loop everything. So because of this, we're just going to say that if equal, in our 50 we're going to put a negative, and if letter 1 of the tile X is a negative, then that means it's a negative. So that means that we need to do our math here. So first we're just going to change our tile X by the clone count X times 32. And then right here, we're going to do this, but instead we're going to put a minus in it, because it's a negative this value. Actually, no, wrong step, sorry about that. It's actually a negative 32 right here. And that's all you have to do, basically. So that's just going to loop it. Now we need to make sure that everything works for the Y, because this is only looping the X for when you move side to side. We needed that you can also move up and down. So right here, we just want to change everything to tile Y and all of that stuff. So this one would be tile Y. This is clone count Y. And these also count, so tile Y and tile Y. And it's basically the exact same thing right now because we haven't actually added any movement. So we're going to make a block. We're going to call it move camera. And we're going to make this one run without a screen refresh. I'm going to put it right below here. And then we're going to put its block right at the top of the position tiles. So we're going to clean up blocks. So right here, we're just going to use if-then statements to make sure you move your player. So if the key A is pressed, if the key D is pressed, if the key S, so now we want S is pressed, and then if the key W is pressed. So for A, we wanted to change, and this is side to side, so we're going to put the to change, and we're going to do change tile X by -5, -5, and 5. And then we're going to change the tile Y by -5 in this case. And then we're going to put a 5 here. And now we should hopefully be able to loop. Done. And it is scrolling in that direction. Now if we're going to be moving that in the direction of D, okay, so if I'm pressing D, right now I'm pressing D and it's scrolling in this direction. If we're moving in this direction, then everything below would move in the opposite direction, which is incorrect because that's not what's happening right now. So we're going to do a 5, and we just need to basically swap all of this. And now it will work just as you want. And you can do everything, and it's all just looped here, basically. See this right here, there's a triangle of mushrooms. And now there's a triangle of mushrooms, and it goes up. And then there's a triangle of mushrooms, up, triangle of mushrooms, just like that. So it works perfectly to loop everything. So now we're going to add the final bit for this episode, and that is that we add more variety to the actual code and to the placement and costumes for all of the tiles. So right here we're going to make a variable. It's going to be called tile index for this sprite only. And right here in our create tile grid map, we're going to put our set tile index right above the tile X to that, and then in between the show and that. And we're going to set it to 1. So now right here we're going to change the tile index by 1. And then right here we're going to change the tile index by -. And we're going to make 2 new variables here for all sprites. These ones, we have grid height and grid width. So first we're going to do the grid height minus the clone count Y for this tile index. And then we're going to make a new block, and we're going to make this block populate tile grid. Run without screen refresh. And this is just going to be setting all the tiles into a list, and then the tile index switches the stuff to the specific costume corresponding in that list. So we can just put it right there. Actually, it needs to be right up here because we want it to populate the tile grid before we actually create the tile grid map. So now we want to make sure that it uses new. So new, so we're going to make a list here. We're going to do, this is going to be for all sprites. We're just going to call it Procedural Generation Tile Info. Because this is usually referred to as procedural generation when you're making a world that generates itself. So first thing is we're going to delete all of that list because we don't want to end up using old information, we want it to be new. We want it to actually generate new stuff. Next, we're going to use a repeat. We're going to use a multiply. We're going to use the grid height and the grid width multiplied by each other. Sorry about that, that's actually incorrect. We're going to use a repeat loop. We want it to be the grid width on top and the grid height at the bottom. And then we're going to use an add thing. So what are we going to add? We're going to be adding, and this is going to be actually very long, so give me a second here and I'll be right back when I have all of the pick random information, then I'll explain it. So give me a sec. Alright, so right here we have 4, 4, 4. So we need 3 4s in the pick random. Then after that we need an 8, then a 17, then a 9, then a 17, and a 9. And it's going to work perfectly. One issue is that we haven't actually set these variables, these grid height and grid width variables, to anything. So we're just going to say set the grid height and set the grid width. So grid width, we're going to say 350, and then 250 for the grid height. And we're going to pop it right there. Now, one last sort of final step here that we need to do is we need to make sure that it actually switches the to that tile costume. So we're going to set the tile costume to item tile index of procedural generation, tile info, and all of that stuff. And then right here we can remove this set tile costume block. And now hopefully it will work. There you go. It sort of does work. One slight issue we're experiencing is the fact that we set it to 4. Now in this project right here, we have it that I actually have a border here, so we can just remove that later. But we want to actually set all of these 4s to 3s, and it'll fix the problem. Bam! So now it's procedurally generated. It can tile, it can scroll, it can do everything you could ever wish for. So now, before we end off the video, I'm just going to do a quick explanation of how the information works. So it resets the variables, then it creates the tile grid using all of these variables, and it moves everything using this go-to block. It populates the tile grid, though, so that it can switch all the costumes, and while it's making the grid, it changes the tile index so that we know where in the list we are. Then it's going to move the camera every here and there whenever you're pressing a key. And then it checks to see if the tile is off screen, and if it is, then if it's negative, it will do one thing. If it's positive, then it'll do the other, and that basically just helps it loop around for the Y and X coordinates. It switches to big so that it is able to scroll off screen, and then it switches back to the tile costume so that it can loop and everything. Just like this. So that's basically a quick summarization of everything we created. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did enjoy today's videos, then please like and subscribe for more content. And if you are enjoying this new RPG tutorial series, then let me know in the comment section down below. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.